Fat widow evicted for being Eyesore Mountain. Man said, "You are the beauty this town needs." The skillet hissed and the kettle sang when a fist hammered the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. Penelope Hartwell, Penny to the few who still dared call her friend, wiped flour from her palms and opened it to winter air and contempt. On the stoop stood Reginald Ashworth III in a velvet-collared coat, eyes like polished coins. In one hand he held a folded legal notice. Behind him clustered the neat hats and narrowed mouths of Willowbrook's Beautification Committee. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, as if addressing a stain, "by order of the committee, you have 3 days to vacate your residence." His gaze slid over her full figure, the patched porch rail, the children's skates by the step, fails to maintain community standards. Lucy, 8, clutched Penny's skirt. Thomas, 6, peered from behind his mother's elbow. "Sir," Penny said, steady because they were listening, "my rent is paid. My husband died fighting the bandits that once terrorized this road. This is our home." Reginald's lip curled. "Your contract includes appearance clauses. Willowbrook aspires to refinement, not eyesores." He didn't bother lowering his voice. "You are unfit for the district's aesthetic." Sniffs and murmurs swelled from the ladies. "Our children ask why she looks like that. It upsets the tone of the avenue. A rural cottage would be more suitable for her sort." Penny felt the words like stones, but she stood straight because Lucy and Thomas were measuring the shape of courage. "We won't be trouble," she said. "We never have been." "You have 3 days," Reginald repeated, thrusting the paper at her. When the committee turned away, frosted grass crackled under their careful boots. Neighbors who once waved now shut curtains. 3 days turned to boxes, to small shoes tied together by frayed laces, to Lucy whispering, "Mama, where will we sleep?" Penny packed in silence, heart scalding, jaw set. By the time the wagon was loaded, a crowd had gathered to watch. "About time," someone muttered. "Town'll look cleaner," another said. Penny lifted the last crate and felt her strength go thin. "That's enough." The voice rolled from the back of the crowd, deep and edged with thunder. Heads turned. A tall man shouldered through broad as a barn door, hair wind-tossed, eyes the green of pine-shadowed snow. Jeremiah Blackstone, the engineer who walked away from Denver's clubs to build in the high country, the rancher from Silver Peak, the man the hills obeyed. He planted himself between Penny and the gawkers and looked Reginald up and down as if measuring a flawed beam. "Explain," he said, quiet as a loaded trigger, "why you're throwing a widow and 2 children into winter." The air hung heavy, brittle with frost, as Jeremiah's words cut through the crowd. Reginald Ashworth smoothed his gloves with trembling fingers, trying to mask the sudden edge of fear in his eyes. He had power when surrounded by committees and whispered agreements, but standing before Jeremiah Blackstone was another matter. Jeremiah was not merely tall, he loomed, shoulders hewn from years of swinging a hammer, jaw lined with the grit of a man who had stared down mountain winters. His presence silenced even the boldest tongues, for he was known to live where few dared, on Silver Peak, where snow buried roofs and wolves prowled the dark. He was said to have carved a life there alone, building ranch and mine with his own 2 hands. Penny held Lucy and Thomas close, torn between shame and wonder. She knew Jeremiah by sight, who in Willowbrook didn't? The giant who sometimes came down the mountain with wagon loads of timber or ore, then vanished again, before the gossip could catch him. Rumors swirled that he had once been an engineer of great promise, that he had lost a family to illness, that he had sworn off society forever. She had never expected his shadow to fall across her humiliation. Reginald cleared his throat. "This is a matter of civic standards, Blackstone. The committee has decided—" Jeremiah stepped closer, towering until Reginald had to tilt his chin upward. "Your committee decided a woman is too fat to live among you. That children should be put in the cold because their mother doesn't fit your picture?" His voice deepened, dangerous. "That's not a standard. That's cowardice." The crowd shifted, whispers rippling. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others clung to silence, unwilling to cross either man. Lucy tugged Penny's sleeve. "Mama, is he angry at us?" she whispered. "No, darling," Penny soothed, though her own heart thundered. "He's angry for us." Jeremiah turned then not to the committee, but to her. His green eyes softened, the storm in them tempered by something steadier. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his tone gentled, "I don't know you beyond what I've seen these last minutes, but I know injustice when it stands before me. You and your children deserve better than this farce." Penny's throat tightened. She had braced herself for pity, for charity wrapped in condescension, but what she heard was respect. Reginald sputtered, trying to reclaim control. "Blackstone, this is no concern of yours. Willowbrook has rules." "Then Willowbrook's rules are broken," Jeremiah said flatly. He raised his voice, letting it roll across the gathered crowd. "This woman's husband gave his life to defend this town, and now you repay her by calling her an eyesore? Shame on every one of you who stood by to watch." Several townsfolk shifted uncomfortably. A few muttered apologies as they drifted away, unwilling to face Jeremiah's glare. Penny felt her knees weaken, not from despair this time, but from the sudden, shocking sense that someone stood on her side. Thomas peered up at Jeremiah, wide-eyed. "Mister, are you gonna help us?" Jeremiah crouched then, his immense frame folding with surprising gentleness. He looked the boy in the eye. "Aye, lad, you won't be out in the cold tonight, not if I have a say." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Mrs. Pemberton's painted smile faltered. "Mr. Blackstone, surely you don't mean to take her in," she sneered. "That would tarnish your reputation." Jeremiah rose again, his shadow long against the setting sun. "My reputation?" He looked down at Penny, at her trembling hands clutching her children. "The only reputation worth having is one where you stand by what's right." He turned to Penny fully now, voice steady and sure. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you'll allow it, you and your children will come with me. Silver Peak has room enough, and more warmth than these folk will ever give you. I won't offer charity. I'll offer a home." Penny's breath caught. Her eyes brimmed as Lucy pressed against her side, whispering, "Please, Mama, let's go." The choice stood before her, shame and exile alone, or the unknown, with a man whose very presence broke the cruelty of the crowd. Her heart pounded. Could she dare to trust him? The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled away from Willowbrook, leaving behind the narrow streets where Penny had once believed her husband's sacrifice bought her a place to belong. The town that had jeered and whispered now shrank in the distance, its church spire fading behind the gray veil of snowfall. Jeremiah sat tall at the reins, shoulders hunched against the cold, every flick of his wrist steady as iron. Beside him, Penny held Lucy close while Thomas huddled under the heavy wool blanket Jeremiah had pressed into their hands before setting off. The silence of departure clung like a shroud until Penny finally spoke. "You didn't have to do this." Her voice was low, half ashamed, half grateful. "You barely know us." Jeremiah didn't turn. His gaze stayed on the trail, eyes narrowed against the wind. "I know enough. I saw a good woman thrown out by cowards. That's all a man needs to know." Lucy peeked from beneath the blanket, whispering to Thomas, "He's like a knight from Mama's stories." Thomas grinned, small teeth flashing in the dim light. "A giant knight." Jeremiah's stern face softened at that. "A knight, eh? Giants eat too much to stay noble." He winked at them, and the children giggled, their fear easing. The trail soon bent upward into the foothills, where the snow deepened and trees loomed dark and heavy with ice. Penny had always known the mountains from afar, the shadowy ridge that crowned the horizon, but riding into them was another thing entirely. The wind cut sharper, and the air smelled of pine and wild earth, untamed and dangerous. She tightened the blanket around her children. "How far is it?" "Half a day if the weather holds," Jeremiah answered. He glanced sideways, his voice softening. "You're safe now. That's the part that matters." Safe. Penny rolled the word on her tongue as though she didn't recognize it. She had known years of duty, years of stitching other people's garments by candlelight, years of holding her head high while whispers of her weight and widowhood followed her through the market. Safe had been a memory, not a promise. The wagon hit a rut, jolting them. Jeremiah steadied the reins, then pulled them to a stop near a frozen creek. He climbed down, his boots crunching in the snow, and unfastened a kettle from his supplies. "You must be hungry," he said. "There's stew in here. It's not fine, but it'll warm you." Penny blinked, startled. No man in Willowbrook had ever thought of her comfort, not since her husband died. She watched as Jeremiah ladled the steaming venison stew into tin bowls, serving the children first, his great hands oddly careful. Lucy blew on the hot broth, eyes shining. "It's the best I ever had," she declared after her first sip. Jeremiah chuckled, the sound rumbling like a distant drum. "You must not have had much mountain food, little one. It's plain fare, but it fills a belly." When Penny accepted her bowl, their fingers brushed. His hand was rough and calloused, hers cracked from endless sewing, but the touch lingered longer than an accident should. She felt warmth creep into her cheeks, a warmth the stew alone could not explain. They ate by the fire Jeremiah built swiftly, the flames licking high, pushing back the cold. The children leaned against Penny, bellies full for the first time in days, while Jeremiah stood watch, eyes scanning the trees. "You left Denver," Penny said finally, her voice hesitant. "Why?" He didn't look at her, not at first. His jaw tightened, then he answered, "Because I got tired of men who measure worth by weight of coin and surface beauty. I'd seen enough of their games. Out here, a man proves himself by work, not words." Penny studied him in the flickering firelight. His face was lined, weathered, but there was something in his eyes, something steady, something true. When the fire died low, Jeremiah stamped it out, lifted Thomas into the wagon with ease, then tucked Lucy under the blanket beside him. Before Penny climbed back in, Jeremiah handed her his own heavy coat. "You'll freeze without it," she protested. "I've weathered worse," he said simply. "Keep your children warm. That's what matters." As the wagon pressed on into the night, Penny wrapped the coat around her children and herself, breathing in the faint scent of pine and iron that clung to it. Her heart beat faster, though she told herself it was only from the cold. Snow swirled silver beneath the moonlight. The road wound higher, each turn carrying them further from cruelty and closer to something Penny couldn't yet name, shelter perhaps, or maybe the beginning of a new life. Behind them, Willowbrook's gossip was fading. Ahead, Silver Peak waited. The wagon creaked into the clearing just as dawn bled pale over the ridge. Penny gasped when she saw it, Silver Peak Ranch rising from the snow like something carved from the very mountain. A 2-story log house stood sturdy against the wind, smoke curling from its stone chimney. To one side sprawled a barn, its roof sagging beneath white drifts, and beyond that fields sleeping under frost, waiting for spring. Lucy clapped her mittened hands. "Mama, it looks like a castle." Thomas's eyes widened. "And he's the giant knight." Jeremiah only grunted, though a smile tugged at his beard. "It's no castle, little ones, just wood and stone, but it'll keep you warm." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine pitch and old leather. A great hearth dominated the main room, its mantel crowded with iron tools and a rifle polished by years of use. Rugs of bear hide softened the plank floor, and shelves sagged with books and jars of preserves. It was not grand, but it breathed safety. Jeremiah carried in their boxes as if they weighed nothing, setting them near a small room off the main hall. "This'll be yours," he said. "2 beds for the children. I'll fix a cot for you until we build better." Penny touched the quilt folded neatly at the foot of Lucy's bed. It was hand-stitched, its squares faded with age, but clean. He had thought of this of them long before offering. The knot in her chest loosened just a little. That first day, Jeremiah showed Thomas how to split kindling, guiding his small hands on the axe handle. Lucy sat with Penny by the fire, mending a rip in her dress while Jeremiah prepared supper, thick stew again, with fresh bread baked in a cast-iron skillet. When Penny reached for the ladle, Jeremiah stopped her gently. "You've carried enough for one lifetime. Let me." The words undid her more than the warmth of the food. In Willowbrook, every act had been measured against what she lacked. Here, for the first time, someone measured her by how much she had already borne. Nights fell early in the mountains. When wind howled against the shutters, Jeremiah checked the latch twice, then banked the fire high. Penny tucked the children under blankets, humming lullabies until their breathing grew soft. Only then did she sit by the hearth, her hands idle, unsure what to do with the silence that wasn't filled with shame. Jeremiah sat across from her, sharpening a knife with slow strokes. The firelight gilded the hard lines of his face, softened the scar that cut across his cheek. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it landed heavy, as though each word had been weighed. "You're safe here," he said one night, without looking up from the blade. "No committee, no landlord, no one to take this from you." Penny swallowed against the sudden lump in her throat. "Safe," she whispered back, testing the word as though it might vanish if spoken too loud. Days tumbled into weeks. Penny rose early to knead bread in the warm kitchen while Jeremiah tended the stock. Together, they taught the children small chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, sweeping the porch clear of snow. Laughter returned to Lucy's eyes, mischief to Thomas's. Jeremiah never intruded on her space, but his quiet acts said more than any declaration. He left his coat hung by her door on the coldest nights. He fixed the hinge on her trunk without being asked. He set aside the last slice of pie for the children and pretended he had already eaten his fill. One evening, when Penny dropped a basket of kindling, scattering logs across the floor, Jeremiah stooped to help. Their hands brushed over the same piece of wood, and for a moment their eyes met hers wide, his steady, green as mountain pine. He didn't move away. "You've strength in you, Penny Hartwell," he said quietly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her cheeks burned, not from the fire, but from something deeper. For the first time in years, she believed the words. The cabin, once Jeremiah's fortress of solitude, grew alive with sound children's laughter, the thump of boots, Penny's humming as she cooked. Jeremiah found himself lingering by the doorway longer each evening, watching her move about the kitchen, fuller and brighter than the women Willowbrook had cast her against. She belonged here, he realized, not as a guest, but as the heart of it. But in the distance, far below the mountain, Willowbrook stirred. Reginald Ashworth had not forgotten the humiliation of being defied before a crowd, and Penny, though safe for now, knew the world had not finished with her. Still, as she tucked her children into their beds and heard Jeremiah's heavy tread outside her door, she allowed herself to breathe for the first time since her husband's death, not as a widow, not as an eyesore, but as a woman beginning again. Winter deepened on Silver Peak, the snow piling high against the fences and barns, but inside the cabin, warmth thrived. Penny grew stronger with each passing day. Her cheeks, once pale from worry, now held a healthy glow from fireside work and crisp mountain air. Lucy and Thomas laughed freely again, chasing one another across the yard with Jeremiah's 2 dogs bounding beside them. Yet, beneath the calm, shadows stirred. Penny often caught Jeremiah staring out at the mountains, his jaw tight, his hand resting unconsciously on the scar across his cheek. At night, when he thought she was asleep, she heard him pacing the main room, boots heavy against the floorboards, as though wrestling demons too loud for silence. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Penny set 2 mugs of hot cider on the table and said softly, "Mr. Blackstone, who were you before this mountain?" For a long moment, Jeremiah did not answer. The fire cracked, the wind howled through the pines outside. At last, he sat, cradling the mug in both hands. "I was an engineer," he said, "in Denver. I built bridges, railroads, shafts into the earth. Men trusted me with their lives. Then one winter, the mine collapsed. 40 Dr. 7 men never walked out. And He stopped, his voice breaking. "I was the one who signed off on the plans." Penny's eyes softened. "You blamed yourself." "They called it an accident," Jeremiah muttered. "But I see their faces every night. After that I left. Built this ranch with my own hands, swore I'd never answer to anyone's greed again." He looked at her then, eyes burning. "That's why I couldn't stand by in Willowbrook. I've seen too much of men like Ashworth taking, destroying, never paying the cost." Penny reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You saved us, Jeremiah. My children will never forget that, and neither will I." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though the weight never fully left. Down in Willowbrook, Reginald Ashworth seethed. To be defied publicly by a widow and an outsider worse, to lose the crowd's approval, was humiliation he could not endure. Over brandy in the mayor's parlor, he spun his tale. "She was supposed to be gone," he hissed. "Now she's living in that mountain hermit's fortress. Do you realize what people whisper? that I abused my authority, that she was mistreated. The mayor, his father, frowned. You gave them reason to whisper. Reginald slammed his glass down. I'll give them reason to fear instead. Blackstone owns more than a ranch. He owns a silver claim. If I can prove he took her under false pretenses, lured her with promises, we can seize the land for legal fees. The law will do the work. Victoria Pemberton and her women's social club fanned the gossip. Have you heard? They whispered in the mercantile. Jeremiah Blackstone forced that poor widow up the mountain. Who knows what bargain she made to keep her children fed? By week's end, half the town believed Penny had been bought. Word of the slander reached the ranch when a peddler passed through. Penny paled as he repeated it. Lucy, old enough to understand, burst into tears. Why do they hate us, Mama? She cried. We didn't do anything wrong. Jeremiah's face turned to granite. Because they fear what they don't understand, he said, and because men like Ashworth only know how to destroy. That night, Jeremiah took Penny aside. If you want to leave, if you fear what they'll say, tell me now. I'll get you safe passage to Denver. Penny shook her head fiercely. No, my children have roots here now, and so do I. I won't run again. She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. This is our home. If Ashworth wants to drag me through the mud, let him. I won't let him steal the life we've built. Jeremiah studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. Then we'll face him together. Spring came late to the mountains, the thaw revealing both blossoms and dangers. Notices began arriving, legal papers stamped with the Ashworth seal. Claims of illicit cohabitation, accusations that Penny had abandoned her lease without settlement, petitions to revoke Jeremiah's land grant. Penny's hands trembled as she read one aloud by the fire. They're trying to take everything. Jeremiah's voice was steady, but his fists clenched. Let them come. I built this ranch with blood and stone. No committee will tear it down. Yet Penny knew this fight was different from storms and wolves. This was a battle of ink and lies, fought in courts where truth mattered less than influence, and Reginald Ashworth held the ears of Willowbrook's leaders. The seeds of conflict had been planted. Soon they would grow into a storm that would test not just Jeremiah's strength or Penny's resolve, but the fragile family they had built on Silver Peak. The summons came on a cold morning when the mountain still wore its veil of frost. Jeremiah was mending a fence when the sound of hooves echoed up the trail. Penny stepped onto the porch, clutching her shawl, her children peering out from behind her skirts. Reginald Ashworth rode at the head of a dozen men sheriff's deputies, lawyers in pressed coats, and hired guns with rifles slung across their backs. Their horses churned up mud as they fanned into the yard. "Blackstone," Reginald called, his voice sharp with false authority. "By order of Willowbrook, you are harboring a widow under false pretenses. She and her children will return with us. Your land, pending review, will fall under the town's jurisdiction until the courts decide." Jeremiah straightened, the hammer in his fist glinting in the morning light. He said nothing at first, only walked forward until he stood between Penny and the intruders. "This isn't your land," he said finally, "and that woman isn't your prisoner. She's here by her choice, and her children are safe where they belong." Reginald sneered. "Safe or trapped? Everyone knows you lured her here. A woman of her kind wouldn't choose you unless she had no other way to survive." His gaze slid to Penny. "Tell them, Mrs. Hartwell, tell them you're ready to come back." Penny's heart thudded, but she stepped out from behind Jeremiah, her voice steady, though her hands shook. "The only prison I ever knew was Willowbrook. Here my children laugh. Here we're not treated like filth. I will never go back." The words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. Reginald's face flushed with fury. "Enough! Sheriff, seize them!" The deputies hesitated, glancing uneasily at Jeremiah's towering form. The rancher's green eyes burned like embers as he dropped the hammer and pulled a rifle from the wall of the barn. With a single fluid motion, he cocked it. "No one takes a step closer," Jeremiah growled. "You'll cross this yard only over my body." For a tense moment, the yard was silent, but for the snort of horses and the crackle of the fire in the hearth behind Penny. Then Lucy's small voice pierced the stillness. She darted forward, clutching Jeremiah's leg. "Don't hurt my Uncle Jerry. He's our papa now." The men shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering across their faces. One deputy lowered his rifle. Another muttered, "This isn't right, Reginald. She's with him by her own will." Reginald's temper snapped. He spurred his horse forward, pointing his pistol at Jeremiah. "Stand aside, or I'll—" But before the threat finished, Jeremiah's rifle barked into the air, the bullet slamming into the dirt at Reginald's horse's hooves. The animal reared, throwing its rider into the mud. The hired guns raised their weapons, but the deputies, shaken by Penny's declaration and the children's pleas, blocked them. "Enough!" the sheriff shouted. "This has gone too far. Ashworth, you're abusing the law for your own pride. I won't see blood spilled for your grudges." Reginald scrambled to his feet, his fine coat spattered with filth. His eyes burned with hatred as he pointed at Penny. "This isn't over. You'll regret choosing him." Jeremiah's voice thundered back, calm but deadly. "No, Ashworth. It's you who'll regret underestimating her." The posse broke apart, deputies driving the hired guns down the trail. Reginald was forced back into town in disgrace, mud streaking his face, his authority shattered. When the dust settled, Jeremiah lowered his rifle. Penny rushed to his side, her hands trembling as they touched his arm. "You could have been killed," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes softening. "For you? For the children? There's no risk I wouldn't take. You're the beauty this town doesn't deserve, but the one I'll fight for until my last breath." And for the first time, Penny believed that no power law, wealth, or cruelty could uproot what they had begun to build on Silver Peak. Night fell quiet over Silver Peak. The children slept soundly, their soft breathing rising and falling beneath patchwork quilts, while the fire in the hearth cast long golden shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the mountain loomed silent, the stars pricking its crown with light. Penny sat at the wooden table, her hands curled around a mug of tea gone cold. The day's chaos still throbbed in her chest, the shouting, the rifles, Reginald's threats, but beneath it all was something steadier, stronger. Jeremiah's voice, his vow that he would stand for her until the end. The door creaked, and Jeremiah stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders. He set his rifle by the door, then came to sit beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was not heavy, but warm, as though words were not needed. At last, he reached across the table and laid his broad, calloused hand over hers. "You're safe here," he said simply. Tears welled in Penny's eyes, not from fear, but from relief so sharp it cut. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart swelling with something she had thought lost forever. Through the small window, the lantern light glowed against the dark. a beacon in the wilderness. Inside the cabin, warmth gathered of children's laughter, of shared bread, of hands that promised not to let go. Yet outside, the world was not done with them. Reginald's threats still echoed. The law could twist again, and the town's disdain might one day rise like another storm. But for tonight, in the cabin on Silver Peak, Penny allowed herself to believe, and the question lingered like the wind in the pines, would love be strong enough to withstand all that lay beyond the mountain? Stories like this remind us that even in the harshest winters of life, kindness can build a fire strong enough to outshine cruelty. Penny was cast aside, humiliated, and driven out, yet in the mountains she found not only shelter, but a love that saw her worth. Where are you listening from tonight? I'd love to know which part of Penny and Jeremiah's journey touched your heart most. If you still believe in love that protects, heals, and endures, stay with me, because the next story waiting in the mountains is meant for you.